Welcome to The Nation. I'm PASHA Rahim. Today we are discussing a major milestone for Malaysia's governance. The latest Corruption Perceptions Index, or the CPI 2025, sees Malaysia rising to the 54th spot, up from 57th in 2024, and with our score rising to 52 points. Joining us in the studio today is RAYMON Ram, President of Transparency International Malaysia, to share his professional take on this development. Welcome, RAYMON.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about this jump.
Sure.
Not very much, 3 spots, but still, good progress.
Yep.
So we've also gained 2 points. Now, in your view, what was the biggest game changer in the last year that it convinced international assessors that we are moving in the right direction? Now, when we talk about the CPI, we're talking about public perception. Yeah, it's not actual progress. Just to put that into perspective.
Okay. I mean, to understand the CPI and to look at what could have impacted the score at the moment, first you have to go back at the evaluation period, right? So because when you talk about CPI, when we launched the CPI 2025 a couple of days back, it would take into account the time from between the middle of 2023 up to mid of 2025, right? So it's about 2 years. And we are taking secondary data from independent sources. So there are independent institutions that conduct surveys, and we take the findings from those surveys, and these surveys could be done anytime in that 2 years. Now, if you look at a possible game changer or what really impacted the score, there's no one aspect to it, right? Because what the CPI looks at is, again, we have to understand who the respondents are. I think you mentioned just now about its public perception. We have to be clear here, it's not merely public perception, it's the perception of experts and business people, right? So the idea here is this. During that time, during the 2 years, we saw a number of legislative reforms that were done. For instance, we saw the Public Finance and Financial Responsibility Act that was enacted, right? Then we also saw the amendments to the Audit Act 957, where we talk about the expansion of scope today for the Auditor General to look also into government-linked companies and government-linked investment companies and whatnot. Moving forward, we also had the Companies Amendment Act 2024, and that was crucial because we talked about now the need for beneficial ownership transparency, right? So we knew who exactly is the ones that are running these companies. Now, besides legislative reform, we also saw the introduction of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy that was put in place. So these are different elements that came together. And also, not to forget, the CPI task force that has been set up, right? And it's led by the KSN, right? By the Chief Secretary. So we can see a lot of work being done by the government in terms of institutional reform, and that could have impacted the score. Notwithstanding that, the number of cases that's been the number of charges that we put in place for high-ranking individuals in different sectors of the public administration, that would have impacted the score as well.
Right. So whenever we have legislative reforms or any changes in policy that obviously impacts the progress, when we talk about moving up a few spots or gaining a few points, now is this progress sustainable, or is there a possibility somewhere down the line that we can slip back?
Definitely. I mean, we can definitely slip back, and I would say that from our opinion, the improvement now is because of not only the changes that were made, but also the rhetoric at the moment, right? Because of the statements being made by the government. The Prime Minister has also early of this year mentioned that there are 4 key reforms that he wants to focus on in the year, and we believe that it's time now to change that rhetoric to action. Right? You got to implement what you say you want to implement. Not implementing it going forward would impact the score.
Right. So speaking about that, what's the one weak spot that still worries you?
To be honest, this was not mentioned by the Prime Minister, but it's something that civil society has been advocating for some time. It's political financing, right? That's a piece of legislation that we are in dire need of, right? We don't care who the government of the day is, right? We work with any side of the aisle, but at the end of the day, we need to come to a consensus that Malaysia requires a political financing legislation where we talk about the amount of the disclosure of donations that are made, the ceilings for it, having a fair play for all political parties. I think this is important. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be reported out there. And if we do not plug this particular gap at the moment, we will not only talk about corruption going forward, it might be grand corruption again, like what we saw happen to 1MDB in the past.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about structural reforms versus high-profile prosecutions. So we've seen the introduction of the Finance and Fiscal Responsibility Act and also the expansion of the Auditor General's power over GLCs. Now, do you think these structural shifts are more impactful than just seeing high-profile individuals being brought to court? You know, we're seeing quite a lot of that in the news.
I think the impact comes now that the legislative reforms are done. The impact would come if the sanctions are upheld, right? Sanctions are upheld based on what has been reformed. So, for example, if the Auditor General does find discrepancies in reporting from the GLCs, what is the punitive action to be taken of those in charge, right? If we don't see actions being taken, I think it's pointless to say that institutional reform is done. There were changes in legislation, but they did not trickle down to the enforcement action, right? So I think it's now for us to see what the impact is of those legislative changes, and if there is no impact, you would see reduction in the score going forward.
Right. So just to you know get a clearer picture, what is truly more important, and at this point, what's more pressing? Is it really, you know, to fix the system from within, or, you know, with prosecuting high-profile people in power, is that also fixing the public perception? It
has to go together. It has to go together. Institutional reform has to move in accordance to the pace that has been set by the administration. So if you have said that you're going to table it this year, please table it this year. And if you're talking about prosecution, yes, if there are allegations of fraud or corruption, it must be investigated, and the Rakyat demands answers, right? For example, if there is a DNAA or NFA, as for example, right? Why did it happen? I understand the AG sometimes do not give us that explanation, or if it gives us the explanation, it needs to be understood by those that are responding to the surveys, and only then can we understand whether the legal repercussions were indeed in place, and whether the judiciary is independent at the same time.
Right. Speaking about independence, are these reforms truly independent, or are they politically driven?
That's the thing. Most of what has been suggested or that's being done today has actually been mooted by CSOs in the past, right? So we are not looking at the reforms plan as a political move. We are looking at reforms plan for the good of the Rakyat.
Right.
So, and we believe that with these reforms, you will plug certain gaps that you have currently. Independent oversight, right? Or you're looking at proper governance, proper systems to be put in place. Because when, for example, if you see cases where those at the top are getting charged, very top, the system itself needs to be looked into, right?
Right. Now, we cannot deny that, you know, some people would still be very skeptical. Now, what would prove that all of this that's happening right now isn't just cosmetic?
I think it takes time. It takes time for the Rakyat to feel the difference, right? For example, we are also looking at one of the reforms we're looking at is the ombudsman, right? Having an ombudsman unit set up, a framework set up. Now, this is going to be very important. Why? Because ombudsman will look into maladministration, will look into any form of misconduct in the public sector. It needs to cover all government agencies, right? Even law enforcement agencies. So, for example, if you file a report to a law enforcement agency and they do not take action, or they are too slow in taking action, who do you go to? Now you can go to the ombudsman. Ombudsman could compel these people to provide information as to why such things was not done. So we need such institutions in place. And not only that, when we talk about whistleblowing, the Whistleblower Protection Act alone is not enough. It's a legislative amendment we did before, right, in last year. But you would require, people need, in order for people to have that trust and that courage to come up front, I think you need to have that institution in place. The ombudsman needs to be in place.
Right. Okay, Raymond, we're going to speak a little bit more about the Whistleblower Protection Act in just a little bit. But for now, just looking at our position within the ASEAN, you know, we are currently third. However, we are also still far behind compared to Singapore. Now, what is the gold standard of governance in Malaysia? Are we still struggling? Why are we still struggling to reach that gold standard?
I often say just two words. Two things actually: consistency and political will, right? So consistency in adoption of in policy direction of where you're going. Also consistency in enforcement. We don't want new administration taking over and then you see cases of those in charge before being highlighted then, right? That's also another thing. Then we also talk about political will, right? If you say that you want to reduce corruption, you want to not go into a stage of grand corruption, implement a political financing legislation. That's for example, right? And if you have reforms that's already been planned, carried it out, and to date you have a government, the unity government is there, you can get the approval, you can get it passed through Parliament. So I think it's the best time for us to get it passed.
Right. So what is let's just take an example from our neighbor. What is Singapore doing that we are still struggling with, and how long do you think it's going to take for us to close that gap?
I mean, we can close that gap once we have the political will in place, right? It would not take too long, but at least the initial steps can be felt by the public, right? We can see those initial steps being done. So if you talk about Singapore again, the first thing that comes to mind to everybody's mind is rule of law, right? That's the first thing that comes to your mind, that if you do something wrong in Singapore, you know there will be punitive action.
Yeah.
There is no paying your way out. There is no discounts given at the end of the day or things like that, right? So I think rule of law is number one. Ensuring that the public also believes that the judiciary is independent and cases will go through and there will be a fair trial and things will be in place. I think that's the means for us to reach that target.
Right. So Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim has also set a very ambitious target for Malaysia to be in the top 25 by 2033. That's 6-7 years, not very far away. And to reach the top 25, we likely need a score of 70-ish, right? We're at 52 right now. At our current pace of reform, is the target realistic, or is it, a symbolic aspiration?
I think I have to correct you there and say 68, 70. If other countries don't do better, right? If other countries do better,
and 7 years is a long time.
It's a bit more of a gap, right? And of course, in theory, mathematically, it is achievable. Because if you have 2 to 3 points achieved a year, then you get to your target. It's not going to be easy, right? It's not going to be easy. Again, the reason of the improvement today is because of the rhetoric, because of the messaging by the top, the tone from the top saying that we are going to implement this. If it's not implemented right, then you would not see the increase in score going forward, and you would not be able to achieve your target. And one thing, like I said just now, it's not only implementing it. We can't treat these reforms as checklists, right? Or just ticking the box. It has to be done in the right manner, which is how we proposed it earlier. I think we have to do away also, or the government needs to do away also with the time where they just involve civil society for the sake of involving them, right? Or involving the riot for the sake of involving them. They need to take our perspectives into consideration and understand what the situation is at the bottom and how we can change things going forward. So it has to be collective going forward, and we have to implement it right.
Right. Now, looking from a global perspective, what sort of message does it send out to the world, when we look at this improvement? We're looking at international investors and also the global community at large regarding Malaysia's, our business environment. Because obviously when, we move up the ranks, perception is better. And
I mean, the CPI is the highest regarded, the most widely accepted corruption index in the world. The reason simply is, it has its limitations, but then again, it's not easy to even define corruption in different jurisdictions, right? So for investors, if I want to do business in a particular jurisdiction, I want to look at the CPI to understand whether the government is serious about governance in that particular jurisdiction, whether they are serious about deterring corruption, and what would be the cost going in. Because if you're rated badly in the corruption perception index, the perception for investors would be the cost would be high. The competition would be down, right? Or things like that. So it wouldn't be fair when they come in. So I think it is a very important index, and bringing it up would give more confidence to the investors that, look, we are moving in the right direction. And these 2 points is the right direction, but it's not the end. So don't be complacent about that.
All right, okay. So Transparency International, now you've often mentioned that a rising score should not lead to complacency. It means that, yes, we're doing better, but it doesn't mean that we should just, rest on our laurels, right? So let's talk about the areas where we might still be falling short, and in areas where we still need to really work hard at. There is a lot of talk about deferred prosecution agreements, or DPAs, and there are concerns that this could be a double-edged sword, where corporations might just pay a fine to avoid deeper accountability. What's your take on this? My
personal concern, or even our concern now, is the mixed messages that's going out about DPA, right? The deferred prosecution agreement, first thing we have to understand that there are a few things that we have to qualify for deferred prosecution agreement. Number one, DPA is only for legal persons, meaning companies, not for individuals. That's number one. Number two, it's based on evidential, public interest, and lastly, we have to look at how whether the company has, to go on as a going concern. Now, the evidence, the public interest, and also judicial oversight, right? So how this is done? For example, the whole idea of a DPA is we don't want a company or the whole company to bear the brunt for the actions of certain individuals.
Right.
Okay, so how does that happen? For example, if just say a company, a new management takes over, right? And now they find that there were acts of corruption happening before with previous employees and whatnot. Now, they would not come up front and report to the law enforcement because the penalties under the corporate liability provision for MSDC Act is 1 million or higher, right? Based on the Act itself. So what can happen with a TPA? Now, they could report, they could self-report, cooperate with ongoing investigation. And what would happen is the court, they can then provide a court a plan, a 3 to 5 year plan on how they can revamp compliance, relook at the way they do business. And the court would either accept or deny it. If they accept it, you'll get a reduced fine. So the company goes on with their business, they get a reduced fine, and they need to carry out the plan to revamp compliance. That's better. So you change corporate behavior instead of now implying such a penalty which could put a company into winding up, for example, right? So that's the idea of a DPA. It's not about paying to settle. So I think the messaging out there has to be firm that this is what we mean.
Right. Let's talk about public procurement and also, well, transparency generally, right? So when we talk about mega projects, especially, let's just take an example, the defense sector. This has always historically been a black box. Do you feel there is enough transparency now, or are we still seeing too much secrecy in how large contracts are being awarded? Yes.
So end of the day, we have voiced our opinion out here. We have voiced our concerns, which is, number one, you need an FOI. A Freedom of Information Act. There needs to be a right to information for general public, for the CSOs and for the media to get the information they require in order to voice out or raise up red flags and whatnot. Now, the second part is the amendments to OSA, right? Our Official Secrecy Act has to be amended. For instance, even if you look at the current issue we are facing in the defense sector, right? You're looking at everything being a secret. No. What we have proposed actually is something known as the Swanee principles, which are adopted by certain countries. You do a balancing test between a harm test and a public interest test, knowing what kind of information should be made public and what should be deemed as a secret. You have to balance that out instead of saying that everything is a secret. And only then can red flags can be highlighted early, and you do not wait until what has happened, right?
Right. So just if there were to be a lot more transparency when it comes to public procurement and large projects, are tender details, award criteria, are these some of the things that should be made available to the public?
Yes.
Is there currently bureaucratic resistance to that?
At the moment, we see bureaucratic resistance to that, right? And the issue here is this. Let me talk about high-valued and high-risk projects, right, for example. Now, what had happened in Malaysia is quite interesting because in 2022, right, we had this Treasury circular that came out on integrity pacts, right? So integrity pacts is something now the government, the contracting authority signs with the contractor. And they adopted this word integrity pact for it. But in essence, integrity pact was something that TI, Transparency International Global, came up with back in the 90s. Now, integrity pact is not supposed to be one document. It's supposed to be a tripartite agreement. Meaning, right, if projects are above certain thresholds, certain value sum, if it's high risk or public interest, you need to adopt, you need to have a independent expert monitors or committee set up. And that committee will then monitor the project from start to finish. What does this committee encompass of? Usually it's led by a CSO, and it encompasses of professionals from different professional bodies. For example, the Institute of Architects or engineers and whatnot. So you have now independent oversight. The oversight we have currently in the public procurement sector, or in the public sector, it's internal. Just internal controls, their own site visits, checks and whatnot, which is being proven that it's not working, right? Because there's too many scandals that are coming out. We are forgetting about LCS, you're forgetting about Scorfin, you're forgetting about, things like PKFZ and whatnot that happened before, right? So I think we have to learn from the mistakes and have independent monitoring to be incorporated, especially for high-valued, high-risk and public interest projects.
Right. Okay. So now coming back to the Whistleblower Protection Act, as we had mentioned earlier. Now we've seen some updates, but many still feel that it doesn't go far enough. Now, what is the one specific change that is needed so that a person in a government office can feel truly protected, that they feel safe enough to be able to report an incident?
Yeah, so our engagement with the government, basically these amendments were to be done in phases. Phase 1 has been done, right? And it was enforced early of this year. Now, when we highlighted the issues within the WPA, I can mention the 3 issues we highlighted, the main 3, with a few others. The first was internal reporting is not covered, meaning that if a person reports internally in their organization and they later choose to go to MECC, technically under the Act they're not covered because you must report directly to MECC in order to get protection. That's one. Number 2, you cannot report on anything which goes against any other written law, right? That was also in the Act before. Number 3, if you are a whistleblower and you are found to be part of the crime, in any way part of the crime, there is automatic revocation of your protection.
Right.
Which is crazy, right? So what we did was we got amendments done last year, which only catered for the 2 of 3 I mentioned just now, which is, number 1, we removed the clause for you cannot report on anything against any unwritten law. So you can report now against any unwritten law. And the second one is the part on automatic revocation of protection. To date, the wordings have been changed, meaning that the court or the law enforcement agency instead of using the word shall revoke the protection, it is may. So depending on your level of involvement in the crime itself. The thing we didn't get is internal reporting, right? So that's one. So coming back to your question, what do we require today? I think we should expand the reporting channels that we can report to, not only the couple of law enforcement agencies that are designated under the Act, but also other segments as well. And another thing is this, we have this uncapped cost resolution 10.8, we call it. And what this is the idea, or in practice for whistleblowing, you should protect the whistleblower first. No matter the person was part of the crime or not, protect the individual and the information. Then we talk about the crime that was committed. Right. I think that needs to be clear. And only then will civil servants or anyone else, the Rakyat itself, will be daring enough to come up front with information.
Yeah, so I guess the important shift that needs to be made is, from don't get involved mindset to I should be able to speak up safely. Right. We've got a couple of minutes left.
Sure.
If you had, any advice to the government on the absolute priority for 2026 to ensure that we don't slip back down the rankings, we've got a long way to the top 25. What would that be?
I would say walk the talk, right? Because the plans are there. We can see by you doing good work, right? So carry out what has been planned, make sure the reforms are tabled within the designated timeline, and only then will you gauge the confidence of not only your people, but also the international community, right? And number 2 is what we started off with. Do not take this improvement as just, an end to everything, right?
Yeah.
It's just a mere direction of where we're going. So it shows positive direction, but we need much more to be done in order to reach our destination.
All right. Now, it is very clear that while 54th is a win, the strategic path toward global integrity requires consistent and also decisive action. Strategic reforms aren't just about rankings. They are also about building a nation where trust is the foundation of our economy and our society. I'm PASHA Rahim. Thanks for watching The Nation, and follow us for more in-depth conversation on issues that matter. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you.